Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Hope everybody had a great weekend and was able to get outside for a bit. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo, featuring guest speaker John Horack and his presentation on Space in Time of COVID-19, Business as Unusual. Before we get started, I would like to ask Mike George to deliver a reflection and have Rotarian past President Walter McGee lead us as we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
From the beginning of time, we have dreamed of soaring, of flying like the eagle, steady, confident, and free. We thank you, God, for the ability you have given us to design machines that propel us into the blue sky, to pierce the heavens and soar like none before could imagine. And to those who master the art and science of flying those machines, we say thank you. For when we fly and see the patchwork of the earth, green and lush, water as blue as the sky, and deserts barren for miles, and then when we leave the atmosphere, for that moment, we see the earth the way you must see it from above, a sphere spinning effortlessly in time ad infinitum. Amen.
Amen. And now let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Walt. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Toledo Federation of Teachers as our August weekly meeting sponsor. Thank you, Rotarian Kevin Dalton. Just one quick update today. If you have not done so already, please complete the membership engagement survey that has been emailed to you by SurveyMonkey previous to August 31st. If you did not get it, you might want to check your spam account because that's probably where it is, or you can let Abby know at the Rotary office and she'll resend it to you. This information is very important to our club and our member engagement committee so that they can make a serious effort to engage our club in any way possible during these unprecedented times. And now I'll invite Executive Director Kathy Tate to introduce a new member.
I would like to introduce everyone to our newest member, Reggie Bradley. Reggie Bradley is with PNC Bank. He's a commercial relationship manager, and he's now in his 10th year. He enjoys working with privately owned businesses as he meets their lending needs and provides the banking insight necessary to help these organizations grow. So I've talked to Reggie. I know he's excited about being in Toledo Rotary. He's from a small farming community of Castalia, Ohio, just south of Sandusky. I know a few of you know exactly where that is. He attended the University of Toledo along with his wife, Allison, both earning their undergraduate degrees, making the decision to choose Northwest Ohio as their home. He and his wife have one son, Henry, and one on the way, and they live in Sylvania, so they're nearby. They return to visit their family in greater Sandusky area often and enjoy spending time with family and friends, visiting Cedar Point or Disney and catching a UT, Toledo, or Cleveland sporting event when available. He said he doesn't really have any glaring pet peeves, but he did say that trust and respect, as we all know, are fragile. It can take years to build and only moments to destroy irreparably. So always put your best foot forward. Good advice. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm Rotary welcome for Reggie Bradley. Welcome, Reggie.
Welcome. Thank you, guys. I'm a little under the weather today. I've got a runny nose and a sore throat, and if we can see here, little guy is sleeping in my arms. So I'm glad we could keep the commitment and be recognized as this call. I look forward to working with all of you through the years.
Okay, thanks for showing up, Reggie, especially since
Thank
you
you.
don't feel well, or your
Thank
little
you.
boy. Yeah.
Welcome, Reggie. You have now joined an organization with over 1.2 members worldwide. We look forward to your leadership and engagement within our club. Again, welcome. And now, here to introduce our speaker is Joe Sweeney. Joe?
So never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would be introducing an astrophysicist, let alone no one. I was first exposed to Dr. John Horack a few years ago at the Global Salesian Leadership Symposium hosted by St. Francis. John's credentials are mind-boggling, but his ability to hold the attention of 400 teenagers was equally, if not more so, impressive. Dr. Horack is the Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy. He holds a joint appointment between the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. Before coming to Ohio State in 2016, Dr. Horack served as the Vice President for Space Systems at Teledyne Brown Engineering, as the Vice President for Research at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and spent nearly 2 decades as a NASA civil servant. He only serves as one of 12 vice presidents of the International Astronautical Federation, and only one of 2 Americans responsible for the technical aspects of the Federation. He's a sought-after public speaker and authority on space-related matters across the commercial, civil, and national security space domains. He serves as a NASA spokesperson, aviation and aerospace subject matter expert, and the media contact for CNN, CCTV, and Bill Nye the Science Guy, among others. Dr. Horack was recently nominated to the Wall of Honor at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. John holds a PhD and a master's degree in astrophysics from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and a bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy from Northwestern University. He is an FAA licensed flight instructor with commercial and instrumental pilot ratings. When not consumed with matters out of this world, he resides in Columbus. We now have the good fortune of hearing from one of the country's leading voices in the aerospace industry. I present Dr. John Horack.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you. If I can, let's see, I'm going to see how I can share my screen today. It's a pleasure to be with you. Can you let me know if you can see my slides? Okay, good. And I have the bar of attendees down the side. If you're seeing yourself, just take a look at it. I was really honored to be asked to join you today. And I usually like to come up to Toledo. Last time I was up for the Salesian conference was really a special time to spend with Joe and with the folks at St. Francis de Sales. But we'll have to do it this way because, as we know, we're kind of in the time of COVID-19. And what I want to share with you today is a little bit about how space has both impacted and in other ways not impacted, what we're seeing in the space industry. Of course, Ohio, OH, and then everybody says IO, but since you're all muted, I can't hear you. Ohio has a strong history and presence in space, not just because on the left you have OH, which is a hydroxyl molecule found all over the universe. And on the right-hand side, you have Io, which is one of the 4 major moons of Jupiter that you can see with binoculars or a small telescope. Actually, if you were to go outside tonight and look maybe an hour after sunset into the southeast, the brightest object that you see there will be Jupiter. And then just a little bit lower and to the left, you'll see Saturn. If you were to point your small telescope or a pair of binoculars at Jupiter, you can see Io. So when anyone says, does Ohio have anything to do with space? Of course, I can just show this and it demonstrates that we permeate the cosmos everywhere. Or I can just take 25 cents out of my pocket and I can look at the back. If you think about what's really important to human beings, we put important things on our money. LeBron James is never going to be on a quarter. Pete Rose is never going to be on a quarter. Only things that are really important and transcend time And this is what we have chosen back, now 18 years ago to go on Ohio's state quarter. It's the Wright brothers flyer and an Apollo astronaut walking on the moon. And, sort of 25 cents at a time, these 50 different quarters sort of make a mosaic of what the country is or has become. And we're not going to put COVID on the back of our money, I don't think, anytime soon. It really has closed the world. That 173,000 fatality number that came from the Washington Post this morning and counting. We're all dealing with it. Some of the worst things are the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt and anxiety, suffering, further polarization, isolation, politicization. We can manage a lot of things, but it can be very hard to manage a lot of things all at once. And what's been remarkable to me is that in many ways, the spaceflight industry and the act of flying in space, learning about things in space and what we do above the surface of the Earth, you certainly think, well, it's going to be impacted as well. And no doubt it has. We're all working from home and Zooming, and our children are in our laps as they should be at this time. And we're taking care of a lot of things. But in other ways, things have just sort of carried on. And it's been remarkable. And it's not just, somewhere out there, but things that go on here close to home. This particular picture was taken in March in PlumBrook, maybe 50 miles away from where you're sitting. And of course, the PlumBrook Station Center is part of NASA Glenn Research Center. But what you see there is the next spacecraft that will take human beings to the moon. It's the Orion spacecraft with the European service module attached to the bottom, undergoing and finishing up its complex series of tests needed to validate its readiness for spaceflight. And so, we shut down, kind of started shutting down the world the first week of March. This testing was completed, and that spacecraft was moved out of the PlumBrook facility right as we began COVID-19. You probably watched in May of 2020, where we launched 2 astronauts, Bob and Doug, #SpaceDads, to the International Space Station. And this was the first launch of US astronauts from the United States in 9 years since the end of the space shuttle program. And it was longer than our time between Apollo and the shuttle. It was way longer than anyone wanted. We had been paying Russia something like $85 or $90 million per seat to fly Americans to the space station on a Russian launch vehicle. And here in the middle of COVID, we were able to successfully execute this launch, land that booster, which is another kind of amazing thing, and not just open up a new technical window in how we get to space with human beings, but also an entirely new business model of how we get to space. And researchers at the University of Toledo played a really important role in that flight. You can see here something that I found on the University of Toledo news page back in June. Where one of the most important things you can do in space is to make sure that the 2 spacecraft attach properly to each other, and to make sure that seal between the hatch works. And you can see there, engineers from NASA, University of Toledo, University of Akron, Parker Hannifin, Ohio Aerospace Institute. This is an all of Ohio kind of activity. And as I was working to get ready, this was a really interesting piece, because I think it's a window into how we as the state of Ohio can continue to take advantage of some of our unique capabilities, our unique integration, our skills at working together collaboratively, to provide some really amazing social, economic, educational, and quality of life outcomes for people here in Ohio through space. So again, another window into what's going on, not just locally, but not just globally, but even locally through COVID, as we work to continue the pursuit of space flight. You probably know that there are 3 ships on the way to Mars now. In July of 2020, the United Arab Emirates, of all nations, perhaps that's a surprise, launched their HOPE mission. Now, that rocket launch that you see on the left wasn't launched from Dubai, but it was launched from Japan. So a very interesting international partnership between the Japanese and the United Arab Emirates about getting this mission off the ground and on its way to Mars. Our colleagues in China launched the Tianwen-1 mission. That is a Long March 5 vehicle. That's China's largest heavy lift booster from their seaside launch port in Hainan Island in the extreme southeast part of the country. And that spacecraft is on its way, and it will attempt to land on Mars. If that spacecraft does land on Mars, it'll be the first time anybody other than the United States have landed on Mars. And then you see at the bottom, the United States launching the Perseverance rover mission, along with the little helicopter that's going to fly around on the surface, launched aboard an Atlas V. So 3 human spacecraft now on there, 3 human hands built, not people on board, but spacecraft built by humans on their way to Mars. And they'll arrive in February of 2020. It takes quite a while to get to even our nearest planet. But all of this was going on during COVID as well. And of course, the planetary alignments won't wait. So if these missions were not able to get off the ground, it would be another 22 months or 2 years before the orbits of the Earth and Mars would be in the right spot so that we could efficiently and effectively send a spacecraft to Mars. And everybody has Mars fever. And then, of course, in August this month, we see space dads Bob and Doug splashing down under 4 parachutes, unlike Apollo, which used 3. SpaceX uses 4, and this is the first time we've landed human astronauts from the United States in the water since the end of Apollo-Soyuz in 1975. So what goes up must come down. And thankfully, in this case, when it was Bob and Doug, they went up successfully and also came down successfully. We've seen the emergence this summer of the United States Space Force, not just on Netflix, but also in reality. Of course, the comet, I don't know if you had a chance to see the NWOhio comet earlier this summer, but it was a beautiful sight in the sky. This picture taken in the UK, near Salisbury over Stonehenge. Contracts have been awarded from the United States Department of Defense for the next sets of launch vehicles to launch our most expensive national security payloads. That contract awarded to United Launch Alliance. You see their Delta IV Heavy rocket in the picture in the upper right-hand side, as well as SpaceX. And then additional contracts being let for lunar lander vehicles. So all of this continues throughout COVID, with more to come. You see the upper left, you see the Dream Chaser spacecraft, Sierra Nevada Corporation. They'll be launching their first version of this uncrewed. This is a cargo vehicle, but it will land on a runway like the space shuttle. In the lower left, you can see Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit getting ready to send people on short rides into space, into zero gravity. Having completed some of their test flights, they'll now be soon having paying customers. It's more than I can afford, but hopefully someday the price will come down and we'll all get to go. Maybe they'll have this ride out of Cedar Point as well to go with some of the roller coasters that are there. In the upper right, the James Webb Space Telescope, follow on to the Hubble. And then in the lower right, one of many hosts, probably 6 or 10 small launch vehicle companies that are getting ready to launch their first rockets into orbit. This particular rocket that you see on the right is from a company called Firefly. That rocket is now on the launch pad at Vandenberg Air Force Base, ready to go in the next month or two to launch their first payload into space. So the hypothesis, I guess, if I were to sort of ask you to ask a question, is that spaceflight isn't COVID immune, but it might be COVID resistant. And what do I mean by that? Well, as we look to put in planks in our economy that are less susceptible to high transient events, ups and downs and crashes and booms and busts and COVIDs and other Zoom outages. Space has something pretty interesting. One is that it's a long lead time and a long life cycle. And so if you're in the sales department, anything with a long sales cycle can be very frustrating. Go back to your sales manager and they say, when do you think you'll be able to sell that? You say, well, Q4 of 2025, pretty good. That doesn't really help next quarter's earnings per share and really doesn't help your forecast. But the long lead times and the long life cycles and the multi-year programs are a benefit to stability. Much of what you see accomplished spans multiple presidential administrations, for example. So this creates a certain platform of stability upon which I think better benefit can be built. It's pretty hard to disrupt high profile and national interest level activities. We don't just stop the country. We significantly alter it, we augment it, but the business of the United States does continue as best we can with what we have. There are huge upfront investments already made. I showed the flight of Bob and Doug to the space station and mentioned that that was 9 years in the making. And so those aren't easily or quickly abandoned. And I think that, at least for me, to be able to go out and see the comet NWOhio, or as I was, out over the weekend, just to have a chance to stare up in the sky and see Jupiter and Saturn with the eyeball, even in this time of great stress, there's a certain spiritual, or maybe small s spiritual or inspirational value, or a connection with the cosmos that tends to come, at least for me, in being aligned with space. And as I said, the planetary alignments don't wait. Mars wasn't going to put on the brakes to wait for us to get COVID ready so that we can then launch our spacecraft. So I guess if that's your hypothesis, then maybe a corollary that we're working on, me and some other colleagues here in the state of Ohio are working on, and that is that, when we can participate in the spaceflight economy, this can bring what I'll call a valuable plank of stability in our portfolio of economic activity, whether that's at the city level or the state level or the regional level. And I think we see this go on in Ohio with places like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and with National Guard in Youngstown, and NASA Glenn Research Center, and some of the other anchors that we have in our society and in our economy that are less susceptible to some of the ups and downs. You may not have a higher profit margin, you may have a higher profit margin in some other areas. You may have more rapid growth in other areas. But a good portfolio has a good blend of constituents in it. And for me, spaceflight brings some of this plank of stability, I guess, if I could look at it that way. And we do have substantive assets here in Ohio, key federal installations, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that I mentioned, Air Force Institute of Technology. NASA Glenn is a gem. If you don't, when the cuffs come off, so to speak, and we get to move around again, the ability to go see some of the things that are being worked on at NASA Glenn across the dynamic range of everything that flies, not just space flight, but also aviation, commercial aviation, unpiloted drone aircraft. I could add the Transportation Research Center here in near Marysville, Ohio, that talks about the opportunity and provides 7,000 acres of private testing for anything that moves. And a lot of the farming that gets done, a lot of the base agriculture that gets applied to aerospace is done in our research universities. And we're really, really blessed in Ohio, not just Ohio State where I work. I have to root for them. They pay my salary, but also I root for University of Toledo. They're the Rockets, yay. Dayton, Case Western, Cincinnati, OU, and many, many more. We have a large portfolio of assets. The challenge that I see, I guess, when we look at it, we've got a lot of things we can brag about. We have 5th highest number of top aerospace jobs in the nation, 38,000 plus. This particular slide comes from Jobs Ohio, with over 540 companies, 3rd largest manufacturing workforce. We crank out more than 10,000 engineers and engineering professionals every year. All of that is really, really good. And we need to continue to keep that in mind, in my view, and keep working at that. But a reminder that we need to compete at scale. And one of the things, I'm not from Ohio, but I got here as soon as I could. And as somebody that spent 35 years now in the space industry, from the outside, Ohio often appears to compete, sort of Dayton versus Columbus, or Cincinnati versus Toledo, or Columbus versus Cleveland. And one of the things that I hope that we can work on over the next 5 or 6 years is to figure out how to compete at scale as a state, as I mentioned before, where you have that, and that University of Toledo article was a perfect example of that in a particular matter. Because if I look, and we're happy, we have 38,000 people in the state of Ohio employed in aerospace. Los Angeles County has over 50,000. And so, these are our competitors. And if Columbus is going to try to go it alone and compete in aerospace against LA County, we don't have a chance. We just don't have the scale. But at the state level, we do have scale. And so I'm looking to work with whomever we can, wherever we can, to try to bind us as #NWOhio, that leverages Wright-Patterson, that leverages NASA Glenn, that leverages our dozen-ish research universities, the kinds of things that go on, industry that we have all over the state that may not specifically be what you would call a space company, but their products and their services are definitely applicable, perhaps through material science or logistics or other domains, to the spaceflight economy. And when I look at Northwest Ohio, I actually see quite a bit of assets. On the left-hand side, maybe, I don't know if these are the four keys tied to the four keys of Rotary, but okay, on the left side, you have a strong university research environment in Toledo, and the water quality work that goes on at Heidelberg and Bowling Green State. This is a place where the initial nutrients can come from. We have a very strong political delegation from Senator Capter and Senators Portman and Brown. The Lieutenant Governor is extremely interested in aerospace, as is the reemergence of the Ohio Aviation Aerospace Technology Council in the State House, and NWOhio as well. Leveraging that against an industrial base. I know Owens, Illinois was back when it was Owens Corning, played a significant role in the early part of the space station, for things like windows for spacecraft, glass, heat shield, fiberglass, those kinds of things, interesting materials activities. I mentioned ProMedica because a lot of the things that we're learning in the medical environment and in insurance, and how to regulate it and how to assess risk and how to deliver, those are applicable across space. And then of course the manufacturing base that we enjoy not only in Northwestern Ohio, but all across the state is something we actually make things here. And that's really important. And then the geography of Toledo and Northwest Ohio is really interesting because, number one, you sit in the largest watershed, as far as I am aware, in terms of acreage that drains to the Great Lakes. And most of that acreage is agricultural related. And so space is a huge tool for agriculture, as well as for assessing things like water quality and land use, subsidence of soil, things moving around, mineral content of soil, and all those kinds of things. So there's a strong set of work that's already ongoing, and some of the water quality work that gets done in places like Heidelberg is as good as you'll find anywhere around the world, not to mention the essential need for monitoring, preserving, and mitigating any challenges we have with fresh water in Lake Erie, because it's such an important piece of not only the transportation logistics, but it's where we get our drinking water, the wildlife that live in the Great Lakes area. And then we're in an interesting place in Ohio as well, and in Toledo in particular, because of this intersection of road, rail, water, shipping, logistics, and transportation. So this is just some thinking out of John's head about, some of the raw materials, if you will, that I look for from the northwest part of the state as we begin to further our contributions to space and the applicability of space, and not just the front end. I don't think we're going to be building very many rockets, but we might be the people that use the rockets to tell the farmers, in this area, or here's what we think needs to happen to the soybean crop, or you might consider this rotation this next year with corn, or what have you, based on what's going on in the environment, in weather, water usage, soil quality, and those kinds of things. This was an interesting article from Aviation Week, right? And I think it just speaks again to the stability of a portfolio, of an economic portfolio that has something to do with space. I won't read it to you, it's a lot of fine print, but at the bottom, space continues to be an opportunity for companies to drive growth in this flat to down market. And the recent earnings season shows that companies who are, even if they have a mix of aerospace portfolio and the aviation piece is down, the space piece is up. And so it can tend to sort of, I'll say, leaven the bread, balance the ship, and give us all an opportunity to continue to be productive. So I always look at this, and NWOhio on the left touts us always as the #1 supplier state to Boeing and Airbus. We produce more brakes and widgets and fasteners and flaps and ailerons and tires and nuts and bolts and navigation equipment and avionics and everything else to those two massive manufacturers of airplanes. And my question is, well, why not also the #1 supplier state to SpaceX and Blue Origin and Firefly and the United Launch Alliance? Is that something that we can aspire to and work towards, not just as Columbus or Youngstown, but as an entire state? Or said another way, in 2103, on the 300th anniversary of the state of Ohio, what will we like to have on the back of our state quarter? Like I said, I don't think it's going to be LeBron James. It's not going to be Pete Rose. It's not going to be almost anything that we think about. But yet, if we can put our mind to it, be innovative, take a few steps forward together, I think there's some really bright future that we can think about what we would want to put on the back of our money. So I know it's hard to do a Zoom call, right? So thank you I can't see anybody's face. I don't know if there are any questions. Maybe it was too long, maybe it was too short. But I know our penchant and our ability to sit in front of a screen for a long time is limited. So hopefully just maybe some more questions than answers, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. And if you have a question, I'll stay until there aren't any more.
Awesome, John. Thank you very much. We're going to open it up, as you mentioned, to questions from the members. And so I'll call on folks and kind of bounce around and sort of facilitate that piece. Before we get into questions, I just appreciate the optimism that we're going to have quarters in the year 2103.
I think the students would need them to play drinking games, but that's probably, I don't know that you'll be able to actually spend them.
Yeah. All right, first question, we're going to go to Travis, one of my co-hosts here today.
Thank you.
He's turning on.
John, thank you very much. I really appreciate the presentation. I found it really fascinating. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the pros and cons of private companies like SpaceX working with NASA.
So that's a great question. And I am reminded of one of the things that my grandmother would always say: there's no unmitigated good and there's no unmitigated evil. And so the time has come for, in my view anyway, for NASA to evolve itself and for the United States government to evolve itself, especially in terms of how we do spaceflight. NASA as an organization is really interesting because it was built for one purpose, and that was to put human beings on the surface of the moon before the Russians could do it. And that purpose was accomplished on July 20th of 1969. But as you start a government organization, it becomes very hard to stop a government organization, and so then you have to continue to move forward. And NASA has been just an amazing thing for the country. But it is an independent agency. It doesn't, it says not a part of the cabinet. It's not a part of the Department of Commerce. It's not a part of transportation, yet it has impacts on all of those things. And so it sort of hangs out here on the side. And we could talk for hours about what NASA should be doing, what should the federal government do with NASA. But one of the things that became pretty clear over time was that routine things, or even things that you wished to become routine, even if they weren't, perhaps could be better delivered under a commercial model rather than a government model. And the way I'll look at that is, we have Military Airlift Command and we have Delta Airlines, and they both move people and things around the globe using an airplane and airports and air traffic control and runways and all that stuff. And when the federal government wants to do things like move a program manager from Florida to attend a meeting in California, they just buy her a ticket on Delta Airlines and she goes and then she comes back because not core to the mission. And NASA wants to move further out into space and not be focusing on low Earth orbit. And so this idea originally came about in the first Bush administration. I'm sorry, George Bush administration, first year of the second Bush administration. that maybe we could, through NASA, purchase services to the space station where companies would just send cargo up and down. And I think it's a huge thing. It's an amazing thing. One, because the business model is so different. You know, it's almost like you just write a contract and say, okay, I'll expect my 5 tons of water to be up there in a year. And if it's not, then I can, you know, I have some contractual language that will help me enforce that. It's also driven some innovation. And, you know, I mentioned in passing that we land boosters, the SpaceX booster landed. This summer, a rocket flew for the 6th time. And we said, well, we had a reusable spacecraft. There's one right behind you. And the answer is yes. It came back, but we tore it apart and then put it back together. And we couldn't fly 4 orbiters 6 times in a year, much less one booster up and down, up and down, up and down. So the commercial piece has driven some innovation. It's truly lowered the cost. And number 3, and this is what I think we're going to see, it's a huge disruptor, I think a positive disruptor for the United States in the global launch market. You know, the Chinese want to fly commercial satellites. Country or company has a satellite, China would like to supply the launch to you. So would the French and the Europeans on Ariane. So would the Japanese. And now so would the United States. And I actually had a conversation with some of my students about whether this introduction of commercial space would make space exploration a technical export of the US, just like 747 aircrafts. So I think it's a good thing. Now, I said there's no unmitigated good. And that has to do with, well, what about when things are in the government's interest that aren't well served by the private sector? So for example, I need to get someone to Kandahar in Afghanistan for a national security reason. There's no amount of money I could hand Delta Airlines to have them put service into Kandahar. They're not going to do it. And yet I still have this national requirement. So if someone says we should throw it all over to Elon and let him do it, I would be suspicious of that. And if someone says, this commercial space stuff, we ought to go back to the old days like we did it in Apollo, I'd be very suspicious of that as well. Commercial space is here to stay. The service that we're using on Zoom uses commercial space. I'm sure there's a satellite involved somewhere, and it's not going through a government agency. So sorry, a long answer, much more of a topic for discussion, I think, but more to come on that. And on balance, it's progress and improvement at the same time.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right, next question is from Bob Savage. Bob, you go to unmute yourself and you are up. Go ahead.
All right, John, thanks.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What are you've told us about a couple that NASA is working on that you're allowed to tell us about?
Yeah. So everything that NASA's doing, I'm allowed to tell you about. If NASA's doing something that we can't tell you about, then the question is, why is NASA doing it? Because that's for the DoD and the Department of Defense or National Security Administration or something to deal with. But I can share with you some of the things that I'm pretty excited about. I'm going to be very interested to see the next flight of SpaceX with astronauts on board, because this is where the rubber meets the road. And you know, as much attention as you put on the very first flight, I almost would prefer to be on that one. If you give me my choice, I kind of want to be on the first one, because I know for sure that's the one where most eyeballs are peering most deeply, because everybody realizes this is the first one. And so it's great that we had a successful flight with Bob and Doug, and I'm looking forward to the next flight coming up in the fall, and there'll be 4 human beings, 4 souls on board, including Thomas Pesquet from the European Space Agency. So it'll be an international flight as well. I think that's really an important thing. We kind of saw that in Apollo, right? We had Apollo 11, it worked great. Armstrong and Aldrin got to the moon, they got back, everybody's happy. We had Apollo 12, we did it again despite this rocket being hit by lightning going up the hill. And then Apollo 13 showed up. And we realized, hey, you know, there was always an element of luck, but things can go really, really badly in space. And so this next flight and the cadence of building that, I'm really looking forward to that because I think that'll speak to the reliability and the robustness of the solution that's been put together. The other things I'm looking forward to, of course, in February will be the arrivals of all those spacecraft at Mars. You know, right now they're just sort of hanging out. Isaac Newton is driving. A few corrections here and there, small corrections to the trajectory as needed. But once they arrive at Mars, then, you know, the 8 minutes of terror going through the Martian atmosphere, which Mark Twain said that the Mississippi River is too thin to plow and too thick to drink. And the Martian atmosphere is sort of like that. It's too thin to really help you slow down like the Earth's atmosphere can, but thick enough that you can't ignore it. It'll eat you alive. And so, and it's really interesting, and everything is automated. You know, it just has to happen. The computer's got to do its job. You got to be in the right place, go in the right speed, all that kind of stuff. I'm very much looking forward to the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. Again, always takes longer, costs more than you would like, but we don't remember Hubble's cost overruns. We barely remember the fact that the mirror was ground to the wrong specification. We just recognize it as a jewel in the treasure of what it means to be human and fly a telescope in space and see the wonders of the universe and creation. And then the Space Launch System rocket, the big rocket that will launch the Orion spacecraft that I showed in one of my early slides. That'll be the biggest rocket to launch since the Saturn V. And if you get a chance to go down to Florida and watch that, it'll shake the ground underneath your feet and it'll rattle your chest and your bones and everything else. So those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to over the next, let's say, year or 18 months.
Great. I don't know if I know what your St. Francis connection is, but I happen to be an alum there as well. I actually, a follow-up question. Could you, PlumBrook? I happened to be there years ago and was inside the chamber that you showed. But just curious, what else is active there? I think that's something actually most of us in Toledo don't know about.
Yeah, so maybe I can give you some background. The PlumBrook station is one of the most valuable pieces of NASA's infrastructure. It contains one of the world's largest, if not the world's largest, space simulation chamber. What I mean by that is, in order to simulate the environment of space, you need a chamber in which you can pump all the air out because space is a vacuum, and then you need to do things like simulate the illumination of the sun and other pieces of what's going on, run the temperature up and down, gets very hot, gets very cold. And the first time I walked into that chamber at PlumBrook, it was like walking into the Astrodome. I mean, it's enormous. You could almost fit the infield of a baseball diamond on the floor. And then the ceiling is, I don't know, 120 feet up. It's it's like a 9-story building. And they pump all the air out, and it can hold entire rocket stages. We pump all the air out to simulate the Martian environment, and it's where the airbags for the earliest Mars landings were tested. I mean, it's a huge facility and an amazing jewel and essential item in testing and getting hardware ready to go into space. So that's one piece. Another thing that's very unique at PlumBrook is the ability to separate chamber, separate test facility, but rocket engines perform differently if they're at the surface of the Earth compared to in space. And the difference essentially is that you're ejecting your rocket fuel and combustion components through the nozzle into the atmosphere or into vacuum. And so one of the things that's very important is to be able to try to start and operate a rocket engine in vacuum for your upper stages. Later on in the flight, after you've left the ground, you need to light another engine, let's say, to get to Mars. And the chamber at PlumBrook allows us to do that and actually run a rocket engine in vacuum, which is harder than even it sounds. There are very few places that can be done. There are some other places, but not with the size and capability of what's at PlumBrook. And then the third facility, and I think this is going to become even more important over time, is what's called a hypersonic flight facility. It's basically a wind tunnel, but it allows you to fly models of vehicles at extraordinarily high speeds, let's say 4 or 5 times the speed of sound through the atmosphere. And of course, you know, they're not full-size vehicles, but they're models, and you instrument them and you can watch the airflow over the side and how the shock waves form. And you may have heard a lot about in the news about some hypersonic weaponry that's being developed around the world. This is the kind of regime of flight where those kinds of test facilities are essential. And it will help the United States do the kind of research and development that are needed, both to understand how these adversarial weapons might operate, but also how to perhaps operate our own and protect ourselves. So those are 3 huge pieces of infrastructure at NASA PlumBrook, just south of Sandusky there, not far from Toledo, and it's operated and managed by NASA Glenn in Cleveland. There you go.
Excellent. All right, our next question is from Joe Sweeney. Joe, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and you are up.
So John, who is coordinating the effort to build the aerospace industry at scale that you want to get to?
So that's a great question, and right now in several ways. One, if it's about growing jobs, it's JobsOhio, and we have Glenn Richardson and Tim Sweeney. Don't think he's a relative of yours. Those are the two gentlemen at JobsOhio. They work with the 7 different regional development organizations. The one in Toledo escapes me, but there's Dayton Development Coalition, there's Greater Cleveland Partnership, there's Columbus 2020, which is now called One Columbus. They work to build the aerospace portfolio of the state in terms of helping companies that are here and bringing companies in. At the political level, we have something at the State House, which was put together by Representative Adam Holmes and Representative Rick Perales, called the OAATC, Ohio Aviation Aerospace Technology Council, which works with the governor's appointee, Joe Zeese, and Lieutenant Governor Husted to help advise on things like legislation that might be considered, stakeholder management, collaboration, deeper integration. And then at what I'll call the nonprofit level, there's OAI, the Ohio Aerospace Institute, which is their headquarters is just outside of the gate there at NASA PlumBrook, NASA Glenn in Cleveland. And it's a consortium of companies, nonprofits, universities. Ohio State is a member. And we work hard to perform sort of greater integration and catalysis across these things. So there isn't any one person whose belly button has been pushed and said, you're the one. It's a collaborative effort, and there are both strengths and drawbacks to that. But it's where we are, and it's our future. We're not, like I said, I don't think we're going to be very successful if we compete as, oh, I'm over here and you're in Cincinnati, so we don't want to talk. No, we've got to go recognize that the things that we want to do are being done at scale, and so we need to compete at scale.
Thank you.
All right, next question is from Dave Demana. Dave, you can go ahead.
So my question is kind of a very large practical question, which is how the heck does everything get managed? So with all these launches going on from various countries, we've got private players now. How does all that, who manages who's launching and when, and all the logistics that surround that? Just fascinating.
Yeah, it's a great question. Commercial launch is actually managed through the Federal Aviation Administration. And so interestingly enough, when Elon Musk signs a contract with NASA to launch people to the space station on a commercial basis, his launch permit comes from the FAA. Yet he launches out of the Kennedy Space Center, and the safety range is managed by the Air Force. So you're absolutely right. The coordination is a huge question. And most recently, you might have seen Secretary Ross from the Commerce Department saying, well, if this is commercial space, we're the Department of Commerce, and therefore we should have jurisdiction. It's really hard for NASA to do that. NASA can't write a rule. NASA has no sort of authority to regulate or enforce a rule. They're not like the EPA that can write a rule about how much dioxin you can put in XYZ or how safe you can make it. So that's part of the reason that had to go to the FAA. Beyond that, NASA will make decisions through its leadership, consulting with the Congress, trying to implement the policy of the executive branch about how to go about doing what the executive branch directs and the Congress funds. And so, when you make a decision about, well, should we do that on a commercial basis or should we do that in-house? Some of those decisions get made at the level of a center director. So the person running NASA Glenn, for example, or NASA Marshall in Huntsville, some of it at the level of the program manager. And then for things that are over that pay grade, they get made at the administrator's level. Science is different. Science at NASA is usually promulgated by something called the Decadal Survey, where the National Academy of Sciences, which was actually established by Lincoln in 1863, gets together and they assign a blue ribbon panel, for example, in astrophysics or in planetary science or in earth science, to say, these are the priorities that we think the science community are addressing. And then NASA tries very hard in the science area to design, build, launch, and operate missions that really support the Decadal Survey. And if you have a great idea, if I came up with a great idea for a mission or a science question to answer, and it was not aligned with the Decadal Survey, there's almost zero chance that I would ever get it flown.
All right. I don't see any more questions up, so I'm going to ask one, and I think this. Yuval's got his hand up. That's not really the raised hand I was looking for, but you got lucky, Yuval. All right, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And
John, wonderful.
I do have one more question after you, Yuval, so we got to be efficient on time. Go for it.
Wonderful presentation. I'm absolutely enthralled. Can you say a few words about the President's Space Force?
Yeah, so Space Force, aside from the tongue-in-cheek things that you see on Netflix and, Steve Carell being the commander of, I don't know if you've seen the show, it's actually, in my opinion, funny. But, space has always been, there's always been a military and national security dimension to space. NASA, as I said, was built to beat the Soviets to the moon. And we prosecuted that conflict as opposed to prosecuting other kinds of conflicts that could have been chosen. And for my money, way better to prosecute a conflict about going to the moon than shoot at each other. The first thing that flew in space was a V-2 rocket designed by the German war machine, and they launched more than 5,000 during the war on London and Antwerp and Paris and Brussels and so on. So there's always been a military and national security dimension to space. The Space Force for me is the United States attempt to recognize, and maybe it's been recognized for a long time, but to respond to the recognition that space is now absolutely critical, not just for our defense, but for our way of life. If you knock out GPS, for example, you can't buy gas at the gas pump. You can't take money out of the ATM machine. You can hardly go to the grocery store. Of course, certainly you won't know where to go, and Uber won't be able to take you where you're going. And these assets are up there. They're, billions and billions of dollars worth of assets in space, and they can be very hard to defend. And certainly no one wants to prosecute a war in space. No one wants to weaponize space, but it is militarized. We depend on it for all kinds of things. So, during the first Gulf War and the Iraq War, I remember seeing a smart bomb go down the air shaft thinking, how did that happen? Right, well, that's satellite-based navigation. And so the United States is trying to respond to the fact that space is more and more integrated into what we do. It's more and more critical to our way of life. We have more and more assets there. Therefore, we've sunk a lot of money into it, and we have a lot of national interest to protect. It's a global commons, much like the ocean in some ways, open ocean, and parts of it are vulnerable. And bad actors could take advantage of that vulnerability. And so Space Force is a way of recognizing and responding to that and putting hopefully some more coherence around our response so that it's not as ad hoc, perhaps in the way the question was asked about the FAA controls the launch and then someone else controls the range and someone else. In a time of crisis, that distributed decision-making can be very, very inefficient and ineffective and in fact deadly if you're not careful about it.
All right, our final question is coming from Dr. Durant, Superintendent of Toledo Public Schools, if you don't know him. Dr. Durant, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And maybe. And you should be able to go ahead.
Hello again, just as everyone else has echoed, I appreciate the coming down and great presentation. Was wondering, and as you talk about scalability, how we could develop a direct relationship through your program, and that's what we're doing. And so we launched an Aerospace and Natural Science Academy at the airport.
Yeah.
So we have over 300 students who are there, and with the coronavirus, we actually had to do a specialized bring in and let them go through FAA testing, which many of the kids walk out FAA certified, and Boeing does a great job recruiting them and flies them out to California and other places. And the 180th, they're on the same campus as the airport, and the school is at the airport, do a great job. My thing is giving them another outlet and direct communication as well as tied to your program, as well as be part of that conversation as you begin to discuss scalability, and that we are one of few high school programs that these kids graduate high school with an FAA certified airframe mechanics license. Along, we just added avionics to your program to it as well. How can we become in the discussion and direct connection with you that we're sending kids to your program from our high school program, but at the same time, you have a better understanding of the inventory of kids who are graduating FAA certified, because we're sending them all out to California, and Boeing just taking quite a few of them. And some of them were connecting to Detroit to work in Detroit, Metcalf here in Toledo. But the more that we can hone our own and keep them in the area, opposed to sending them out, we're trying to get Boeing to come here. So ultimately we can keep the kids here, but just your thoughts on it and how we can better have a direct relationship to your program, that we are providing a feeder, because we're starting STEM elementary to feed into the high school as the high school feeds into yourself.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. This conversation, Dr. Grant, is one of the ways to start that. I'm only tangentially aware of the program that you have there. I know you have one. I don't hardly know anything about it, and I need to learn more. So this communication is extraordinarily important. Secondly, not my own particular program at Ohio State, this is for students that are interested in going on and getting a 4-year degree or a master's or a PhD. And that may not be something that everybody wants to do, but certain people will want to do it. And you can make a good living with an A&P certificate and a set of tools. You can make a good living. It can be a good life. And I think we need to make sure that we open whatever doors are necessary for the individual student based on what it is they want to do, as opposed to tell them, hey, you have to do this or that or the other thing. A&P is an interesting activity. That's part of what we're discussing at the OAATC. A&P meaning airframe and power plant, basically a mechanics license to work on aircraft, which you want some very, very good, skilled and certified people to do that because of the consequences of failure. We need to work on that in Ohio. I'd like to learn more about what the program is. At some point will commit to come up and visit so I can learn more. I don't expect you to tell me and service me. I'm happy to go out and learn. And I think that you're absolutely right. Any student in Ohio, from Ohio, who wants to pursue a line of work in Ohio, we should at least have an option, if not two options, so that we're not spending our time, money, and exporting our intellectual capability and our best people to California to come compete against us. So I'd like to learn more about the program. and I'll type my email address into the chat so we can get started.
John, thank you for joining us today. And thank you very much for informational and enlightening program. We'll be, to thank you, we'll be sending you a well-known book in Toledo, Historical Tales of Toledo, authored by past President Clint Mock, as our gift to you. And we'll also make a donation to the Polio Plus Fund in your name. Again, thanks for joining us. So as far as next week's meeting, August 31st, we'll be hearing from Sylvia Whitlock and Francine Kiefer, leading a discussion topic on pioneers in social justice and economic development. A little bit about committee meetings. Today we have the Disability Services Committee meeting at 1:15 directly after this meeting with Board Liaison Cindy Binkley. And next week, August 31st, we have 3 meetings directly after our Rotary meeting. Membership Development at 1:10 via Zoom with Board Liaison Bob DiNardo. The Peace Committee at 1:10 via Zoom with Board Liaison Kevin Mullen. And the International Services at 1:10 via Zoom with Board Liaison Patrick Sheehan. Thanks again for joining us today, Toledo Rotarians. And John, again, thanks for that great presentation. We are adjourned.